I'm 24, and my job is to sit in rooms as a substance abuse counselor and listen to people's lives come apart. I'm trained to hear the stories of total collapse, and I spend my days around people whose lives are visibly off the rails. But lately, I keep seeing a different story showing up, and it's not just with clients, but with friends, coworkers, and people my age who are not in crisis. These are people who are sober. These are people who are disciplined. People who have jobs, routines, gym memberships, saving goals. And on paper, their lives look stable. And yet underneath that stability, there's this same quiet sentence I hear over and over again. I don't know why, but everything just feels empty. And that is the part that shouldn't be happening. Because this isn't burnout, it isn't depression, and it's not a lack of effort. It's showing up in people who are doing everything they were told would make life feel meaningful, which is what made me realize something uncomfortable. When emptiness shows up outside of collapse, when it shows up in people who are functioning, that is no longer an individual problem, that is a structural one. This isn't a commentary from above. I'm not successful and I'm not on the other side of this. This is a report from inside of the problem, from watching people rebuild their lives and then noticing that same hollowness spreading to people who never even fell apart in the first place. And that's what I'm seeing with my generation right now. So to start this right off, the first driver of this emptiness is the disconnect between effort and trajectory. People are not afraid of hard work. My generation is not afraid of hard work. They are afraid of effort that goes nowhere, and that distinction matters. Most people I know are working harder than they ever have, and they're budgeting, they're tracking spending, they're trying to be responsible, they're delaying gratification, they're doing the exact things that previous generations said would lead somewhere. And yet the dominant feeling here isn't progress, it's stagnation. And you can feel this most clearly when you look at housing. You can save aggressively, you cut back, stay disciplined, and then year after year, home prices rise faster than your savings account ever will. This is not happening just once or not during a crisis, but very consistently. According to data from the National Association of Realtors, the median age of a first-time home buyer is now around 40 years old, and this is up from the low 30s just 4 years ago. Other housing studies have shown that the average homeowner age has drifted toward the late 30s and early 40s, and that trend is continuing to accelerate. 4 years ago, buying a home in your early 30s was still realistic in many parts of this country. Now in a lot of those same areas, it's something people talk about eventually, and it really has no clear timeline. And people in my generation don't even know if it'll happen for them. And that shift matters a lot psychologically. Because the old deal wasn't just work hard and buy a house. The first real deal was effort buys you distance from instability. And right now, for many people, effort does not create distance. It just slows the rate of which they fall behind. Employment used to mean momentum, and now it often just means survival. And when effort stops producing leverage, the brain is going to adapt. Motivation is not a personality trait. It is a feedback system. The brain releases motivation when it sees effort translate into forward movement. But when effort only maintains the status quo, when every raise is eaten by rent, insurance, food, utilities, that feedback loop breaks. People don't feel lazy, they feel flat. And from a counseling perspective, this is something I see constantly, and it's not just with people in crisis. I'll sit across from someone who's sober, employed, they're showing up, doing the work, and even when I talk to people who aren't my clients, just normal people in my generation, the language that they use isn't despair, it's resignation. They'll say things like, I'm doing everything right, but nothing's really changing. I don't feel excited about anything anymore. It feels like I'm just maintaining my life. That's not depression, that's actually recognition. And over time, people stop imagining futures, not because they're pessimistic, but because imagining a future that keeps getting priced out becomes genuinely painful. At the end of the day, we're busy, but we're not building a story, and that's where emptiness begins. And you cannot mindset your way out of it. That's not weakness, that's a predictable human response to a system that changed the rules. But the second driver of this emptiness is the collapse of the linear career and the quiet disappearance of stability that used to come with it. Culturally, we still talk about careers as ladders. You start somewhere, you're going to gain experience, you move up, and over time your life becomes more secure. And that is still the case for some people. But that story has not been updated, even though the structure underneath it has completely changed. One of the clearest places it shows up is entry-level jobs. According to research from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York and the Burning Glass Institute, a growing percentage of roles labeled as entry-level now require 2 to 5 years of prior experience. That is not a skills gap, that is a straight-up contradiction. The job you need to get experience now requires experience that you have no way of acquiring unless you already know somebody. So you have to take unpaid work or survive long enough on instant instability to even break in. It's like being told the game is open to everyone, it's a free-to-play game, but the tutorial level is locked behind late-game achievements. And without a real starting point, something deeper breaks here. Careers used to provide a direction. Even if the job itself wasn't meaningful, that still gave you a sense of where you were in time. You could look back and say, I'm further along than I was 3 years ago. But now that sense of progression is completely gone. And instead of ladders, people move through a series of short-term roles, contracts, resets, and it's not because they want variety, but because permanence is not very available. Layered on top of that is a constant instability. Layoffs are not rare events anymore. They are routine business decisions that we see on a wide scale. Entire teams are disappearing overnight just because margins shifted or investors demanded cuts. Even people who are doing well live with the background knowledge that their job may not exist next year. And from a psychological standpoint, this changes everything. When something is unstable, you do not build an identity around it. You don't attach meaning to it, and you don't plan your future on it. This is why loyalty has collapsed. Not because people stop caring, but because caring has now become dangerous. And when I see this from my counseling perspective, this shows up in a very specific way. I don't hear people saying I'm anxious about my career. I hear them saying I don't really know who I am anymore. And that's not confusion, that is just straight up erosion. Identity forms through repetition and continuity. When your work resets every year or two, identity never consolidates. You're always provisional, always replaceable, and always preparing for the next disruption. You are not building something, you are surviving a sequence. And survival does not generate meaning. It generates alertness, hypervigilance, emotional thinness. And this is why so many people feel detached from their work even when it pays the bills. Work no longer feels like a place you belong at. It feels like something you just pass through. You wouldn't build a house on an earthquake fault line, would you? You'd probably just place down a tent. And tents are useful, but they're not homes. Living indefinitely in temporary structures changes how you relate to the future. You stop thinking in decades. You stop imagining stability. You stop making plans that require faith and continuity. Instead, we keep options open, we avoid commitment, and we stay flexible. And from the outside, that can look like freedom, but from the inside, it feels like nothing is solid enough to actually lean on. And that's where the emptiness creeps in. Not because people lack ambition, but because ambition requires something stable to aim at. And when careers stop offering continuity, identity dissolves into a series of short-term adaptations. So you're always adjusting, always reskilling, always preparing for the next shift. But meanwhile, you're never actually arriving. And a life when nothing arrives eventually stops feeling like a life. But the third driver that plays right into this is option overload in a world that no longer provides structure. So when the traditional path did collapse, it wasn't replaced with a better one. It was replaced with infinite choices. And on paper, that sounds like freedom. We have social media. We have so many paths we can take. Some would argue that making money today is broken. You got people clipping live streamers and making 6 figures from it. And there's a million other ways I can mention right now. But in practice, this is very disorienting. Previous generations didn't have to constantly decide who they're going to be. The structure made that decision for them. For better or worse, you lived where the jobs were, and you worked where you were hired, and you built a life around a small number of available paths. And those paths weren't perfect, but they were legible. But that structure has completely collapsed. Life today is a bit more like having 20 open tabs at once. So one tab is a different career, one tab is a different city, different side hustle, a version of yourself you haven't committed to yet. And psychological research from the Columbia University and the American Psychological Association has consistently shown that too many choices reduce satisfaction, increase anxiety, and produce regret. Choice doesn't feel freeing when the cost of choosing wrong feels permanent. So instead of choosing, people are hesitating. And when commitment disappears, meaning disappears with it. Meaning doesn't come from optionality, it comes from choosing and staying. To put this in my counseling terms, this shows up as chronic restlessness. People aren't happy with their lives, they're unsettled by them. They'll say things like, I don't know if this is what I want to do long term. I feel like I should be doing something else. I don't want to lock myself into the wrong thing. There's no crisis in these statements, and there's no collapse. There's just a constant background hum of uncertainty. And over time, that uncertainty becomes paralyzing to deal with. Because when every decision feels life-defining, but none of them feel clearly right, the safest option becomes to delay. And that's why people are staying in limbo. And from the outside, this looks like flexibility, like freedom, like you're just keeping your options open. But from the inside, it feels like your life never quite starts. And this is how structure collapses quietly. Without some type of shared structure, people end up spreading themselves too thin across dozens of directions at once. Little effort here, little effort there. There's no deep roots anywhere. And that's how you end up busy, productive, and doing things right, but nothing feels anchored. And when nothing is anchored, nothing is going to feel meaningful. Because meaning requires commitment over time, and commitment requires trust that staying will lead somewhere. and when that trust erodes, emptiness will fill the gap. This fourth driver of emptiness is the hardest to talk about honestly, because it is so often framed as a personal weakness instead of a structural shift. We live in an economy optimized for frictionless reward, so social media, streaming, infinite content, every one of these systems is engineered to deliver dopamine with as little effort as possible. Neuroscience research shows that dopamine spikes regardless of whether a reward is earned or passively consumed. Your brain doesn't know the difference, but your sense of self does. Meaning doesn't come from stimulation, it comes from friction, from resistance, from doing something difficult and watching yourself become capable. That process is what creates self-respect. When you finish a hard project or master a skill or build something slowly, those experiences have residue. They add weight to your identity and they tell a story about who you are. Frictionless reward does the complete opposite. Scrolling requires nothing of you, you overcome nothing, you build nothing. So when it's over, nothing remains. The issue isn't indulgence, it's replacement. Low effort stimulation is crowding out the slow, frustrating processes that generate meaning, especially in a world where effort already feels disconnected from progress. And from my counseling perspective, this is where emptiness turns into numbness. People aren't in pain, they are understimulated by real life and overstimulated by everything else. And this isn't a moral failure, this is just what happens when the brain adapts to constant reward without contribution. Real life starts feeling dull, and not because it lacks value, but because it demands effort. And when that effort no longer reliably leads to improvement, the brain looks elsewhere for reward. This is why stimulation keeps increasing while fulfillment keeps decreasing. The system rewards attention, not meaning. And this is the system we live in. Your emptiness is not an accident, it is a byproduct of living in an environment that monetizes stimulation while quietly eroding the conditions needed for fulfillment. And when friction disappears, meaning is going to disappear right with it. And no matter how comfortable and how successful you are, life without meaning is going to feel hollow. Alright, so at this point, it should be clear that the emptiness so many people feel is not random. It's not a personal flaw, and it isn't a lack of gratitude, and it's not a failure to appreciate what you have. This is a signal. Emptiness is what a rational nervous system produces when effort, identity, and reward stop lining up. When effort no longer creates trajectory, when careers no longer provide continuity, when choices multiply but structure disappears, stimulation replaces earned meaning, that means that the system quietly removed the main quest and just never told anyone. So people kept playing and wondering why nothing felt right anymore. That hollowness is not a weakness, it is perception. It's what happens when a person is still engaged enough to notice that the map doesn't match the terrain. And this distinction matters a lot, because the people I work with who are truly broken don't ask these questions. They numb, they disassociate, and they disappear. The people feeling empty are often the ones still paying attention. They're the ones saying something about this doesn't add up. That feeling is not something to suppress, it's diagnostic. It's what remains when the old story stops working but a new one hasn't fully formed yet. In that space, uncomfortable as it is where orientation can begin. I want to be clear where I'm speaking from. I'm 24, I'm not rich, I'm not there yet, and I don't have a finished answer for y'all. But I have rebuilt my life, and I got clean, I stayed clean, I rebuilt structure, and I learned how to show up consistently. I support myself, and I sit with people every day who are fighting to reclaim their lives from chaos. And what's disturbing is this. I'm now seeing the same emptiness in my generation, in people who never collapsed, which tells me this isn't about addiction, this isn't about discipline, it's not about motivation. It's about a system that stopped giving people a future they can emotionally invest in. And this channel exists because I refuse to disengage. I'm not here to sell you a framework or to pretend that I've solved it, but just to document honestly what it looks like to build meaning and freedom outside the traditional path, in real time, without lying about how hard or how uncertain it is. So if modern life feels empty to you, you're not failing. You're responding rationally to a world that quietly stopped making sense. And noticing that, instead of numbing it or blaming yourself, it's simply the beginning of orientation. If what I said here resonates with you, and you see yourself wanting to build a life outside of the traditional path, consider liking and subscribing. And comment down below what you thought about this. Do you agree with what I said, and what part sticks out to you the most? If you disagree, I'd also like to hear from you. I encourage y'all to start discussions down below about this. I think it's very important that our generation is aware of this and knows how to move forward. In the next video, I'm going to be breaking the system down even deeper into why life feels like a long side quest for a lot of us in Gen Z. So stay tuned for this video, and if you made it this far, as always, I appreciate you, and peace out.